Many video games unashamedly are power fantasies that allow us to raise all manner of awesome weapons into the sky and bring forth justice and or destruction. There's a multitude of ways to get new and improved weapons in most games, depending on the context, but the best of them will make sure it's never too late to grab the ones you might have missed. You want to be that video game magpie and get your hands on every weapon in a title? By all means, you go right ahead, but the following weapons will require you to be keen of mind, eagle-eyed, and perhaps just ready to consult a walkthrough. I'm Cy for WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 missable video game weapons that stopped you getting 100%. Number 10. SATORI, CYBERPUNK 2077. The undeniable charm of CYBERPUNK 2077 is in player choice, who you are, where the story takes you, and even the weapons you have at your side. The katana weapon type tends to be a popular one, and for good reason, as these stylish blades are as quick and deadly in the world of Cyberpunk as they are in real life. There's a good few to pick from, but the SATORI, the best katana in the game, actually appears in Cyberpunk's first act. In the mission The Heist, players are sent to the hotel room of Yorinobu Arasaka, and then eventually the objective will ask them to leave after a cutscene. Instead of doing as told, however, players should turn on their access and head to the corner of the room to find some stairs that lead to the building's roof. There, players will be tasked with taking down enemies waiting around an AV. Once they're dispatched, players will be able to get their hands on the SATORI katana. It might seem at first like nothing too special, as it actually reduces V's base attack, but with a critical damage stat of 500%, it's pretty much going to make the rest of the game a breeze compared to what would have happened if you'd missed it, which is very easy to do. Number 9. Missing Score, Final Fantasy VII. Getting to the late stages of any RPG is usually about looking at your equipment and making a last run around the world map for anything you've missed. In Final Fantasy VII, this usually consists of grabbing every character's final limit break special move and ultimate weapon. Sadly, a few of these are very missable depending on if you fulfilled certain requirements, but none are perhaps more blink and you'll miss it bad as Barrett Wallace's Missing Score gun. Frustratingly, this weapon literally only appears under the circumstances that you have Barrett in your party at a specific point of the game. When Cloud and the gang make their way back into Midgar, if you don't have everyone's favourite loudmouth eco-terrorist in your group, the chest containing Missing Score simply won't spawn. You'll move on past, overwrite your save, and be none the wiser. Barrett's best weapon in Final Fantasy VII, and the game gives you one chance to grab it. It's an egregious example that horribly sums up how awful missable items are in games. There's no challenge to this, it's simply a matter of circumstance. Furthermore, Barrett is largely considered the most powerful party member outside of Cloud, so it's confounding that the game just lets you waltz on by if you just so happen to be hanging out with literally any other of your friends at the time. Number 8. Peacekeeper, Battlefield 1. From a distance, the Battlefield games seem like solid FPS titles that push the genre forward with their emphasis on vehicles and destructive environments to create sensational, realistic battle zones. That may be true, but it belies the love of Easter eggs that its developers and community have. There might be no more expansive and awesome hunt for goodies than the search for the Peacekeeper in Battlefield 1, which, whilst hard to find, is actually a really quite interesting series of tasks with a worthy reward. Using all manner of clues hidden in the map, as well as on the skins of certain weapons, players must go through a real journey to get the game's most lucrative weapon. After figuring out a series of Morse code prompts, deciphering clues from dog tags that instruct players to destroy certain statues in particular ways, and barreling down a maze of tunnels filled with gas, players will finally get their hands on the Peacekeeper. Not only is this old school revolver plenty powerful, it's also rather pretty to look at, with some superb custom animations. This one isn't technically missable, you can go back and do it at any time, but without a walkthrough, this laundry list of tasks is something that pretty much no single player is going to figure out by themselves. Number 7. Bryonic, Tales of Vesperia. Whilst overall praised for its quality, die-hard fans do take some issues with some of JRPG Tales of Vesperia's design choices. Specifically, that a lot of the game's best content is way off the beaten path. That's not necessarily unheard of for a JRPG, but Vesperia commits the cardinal sins of making some of this content very time sensitive. Basically, when looking for games that are guilty of missable content, Tales of Vesperia wears a rather unflattering crown. One of the most infamously infuriating is Bryonic, a particularly important weapon for playable character Judith. Not only is it extremely powerful, it also contains a few handy skills that really improve on Judith's overall battle style and is well worth getting. Thankfully, it's not difficult in terms of skill, just pure dumb luck. Getting VERONICA is a 12-step process that requires examining specific objects and talking to certain NPCs at precise moments in the story. If you miss one on your way to the end goal, it pretty much means the whole thing is a lost cause. Chances of stumbling into this one are low, and even with a guide, it's all too easy to miss one of the steps on this long and quite honestly boring side quest. There's earning powerful weapons, and then there's this, a stubbornly timed checklist that, if you do it right, doesn't feel like you've done much at all. Number 6. Fusion Rocket Launcher, Red Faction. What makes Red Faction's Fusion Rocket Launcher unique is that it's wielded at you by enemies across the game's later stages. So whilst you can get to be pretty familiar with the business end of it, it's also entirely possible to get through the campaign and never get a chance to use it yourself. Unlike most guns in FPS games, there's no moment where you come across a Fusion Rocket Launcher in the wild, and you must grab one off of the body of one of your downed enemies. Seems simple enough, right? But what if those enemies swap to a different weapon if you get too close? The heavy mercenaries will put away their fusion rocket launchers if you get in their personal space in favour of a precision rifle instead. And when they die, guess which one they drop? If you didn't know better, you'd assume that, checking the bodies of your enemies that you got too close to, that the fusion rocket launcher wasn't a weapon you could ever pick up yourself. Considering that Red Faction, like most PC shooters of the era, is a rather pacey game, that means getting close and personal with your enemies is a pretty common occurrence. It's entirely possible to get through the whole campaign and never once wield what is naturally the most powerful gun in the game. Number 5. Light Arrows, The Legend of Zelda, The Minish Cap. Across Link's many adventures, he's always had a reliable set of weapons that have helped on the way. Bombs, boomerangs and bows, just to name a few. In several Zelda games, the bow comes with multiple different ammo types, being able to fire elemental arrows to solve puzzles or simply dispatch enemies much easier. In the Minish Cap, the NPC Gregor will give Link access to these superpowered light arrows, but only if the player has already met him before actually coming to his home in Cloudtops on foot. Before their journey takes them to that point, Link can converse with a stranger in Hyrule Castle Town to open up and access a teleport stone behind the hero's house. This will take the player to Gregor early and allow them to assist him with a nasty ghost problem, earning them a blue potion. If the player doesn't do this before a certain point and goes to the tower via the Cloudtops entrance, not only will they not be able to grab the incredibly useful light arrows, but Gregor will be totally missing, implying that his little haunting turned very severe in Link's absence. Rest in peace, Gregor. Our only regret is that you didn't give us that weapon upgrade. Number 4. Unlaboured Flawlessness, Ninja Gaiden. The wooden stick is just one of many weapons that Ninja Gaiden's players can wield during the game, but unsurprisingly, it's typically passed over. Not only does it sound and look pretty unimpressive, it's also utterly useless against the game's roster of baddies and a surefire way to get your ninja ass handed to you. Therein lies the beauty. If the player plunges all of their time and experience into the wooden sword, it can go from the worst weapon in the game to potentially the best. It's a tall order though, as it has to be upgraded all the way to level 7, more than any other weapon in the title, and will require most players an entire playthrough of the game to get enough cash to turn this simple stick into a boss-beating super weapon. When the wooden sword has become the unlaboured flawlessness, it's not necessarily immediately powerful, but when Ryu is at 25% health, it can suddenly cleave through all enemies and even defeat most boss fights in 2 swings. Crikey. Naturally, with it being such a huge investment, not to mention a cleverly hidden secret, most players had no idea what they were sitting on. Number 3. Submachine Gun, Resident Evil Code Veronica. Players get their hands on the submachine guns in Resident Evil Code Veronica pretty quickly, but are forced to surrender them to their over-enthusiastic compatriot Steve Burnside. As if you weren't annoyed enough by his whining teenage voice, now he's taking weapons from you. Thankfully, it's not the last you see of the fully automatics, providing you follow the right steps. If the player returns to the military prison from the start of the game and gives Umbrella employee Rodrigo some hemostatic medicine, Claire will also leave the poor wounded guy her precious lighter in exchange for a handy lockpick. Around the midpoint of the game, the perspective shifts and players take control of Claire's brother and future Boulder Punisher Chris Redfield. Encountering Rodrigo again, players are rewarded for their earlier kindness and get their lighter back. From here, it can be used to access a secret second set of submachine guns. It's a clever way to use the back-to-back playthroughs that the game presents, but is completely missable if you don't want to get friendly with an Umbrella employee who put you in a jail cell. Considering that Chris faces down some of the nastiest enemies in the game, you may want to put your grudges aside. Number 2, The Sword of Kings, EARTHBOUND. EARTHBOUND is a cult classic RPG that, whilst never becoming a huge mainstream hit in the West, has inspired many games of the genre. The third character to join protagonist Ness on his quest is honourable martial artist Pooh, who acts as the game's equivalent to the monk class. Not only can Pooh only equip very limited accessories and armour, he is for the most part better off unarmed as opposed to the slingshots and yo-yos he can wield. However, there is one truly beastly weapon exclusively made for Pooh, but it's one of the hardest to find. Each character's ultimate weapon has a staggering 1 in 128 chance of being dropped, that's less than 1% from their respective specific enemy. Pooh's Sword of Kings is earned by beating up the Super Starman enemy that appears in the Stonehenge base, but they only appear as long as the boss of the area hasn't been beaten. If the player, not knowing that they need to fight dozens of them to get this elusive drop, happens to beat the dungeon, then they're locked out of Pooh's one and only worthy weapon for the rest of the game, which is, to put it rather crassly, a bit Pooh. Number 1, the Zodiac Spear, Final Fantasy XII. The core tenets of the role-playing genre are growth and exploration, battling enemies to grow stronger and scouring the land for better equipment to aid your progression. After all, who out there can resist the allure of the treasure chest? Which is precisely what makes Final Fantasy XII's most powerful weapon nigh on impossible to gain. Considering the requirements, the chance of lucking upon the Zodiac Spear is so infinitesimal that you would have thought someone at Square Enix would have realised what they'd made. The chest containing the weapon will only spawn if the player hasn't opened 4 specific but totally unsignposted previous chests. That's right, you are punished for opening every chest you see by having the game's best weapon despawn if you open the wrong ones. Which are the wrong ones? That's up to you to either guess or use a guide to make sure. There's no element of earning this ultimate weapon, merely the act of being penalised for doing something that has been the norm in every Final Fantasy game up until this point, plumbing the depths of the game for all of its content. Square acknowledged how absolutely monstrously evil the hunt for the Zodiac Spear was for the game's eventual release, and in Final Fantasy XII The Zodiac Age, the weapon can be found in a rarely spawning, but at the very least not missable chest. And that's the list. Let us know what you thought of this video down in the comments below. Did you grab any of these weapons on your first playthrough? Be honest now. And of course, let us know of any other missable weapons that we, well, missed. Make sure you like this video, share it with your friends, subscribe and hit that notification bell. I've been Cy for WhatCulture, and have a good week.